Yeah, you go back to Abraham Lincoln's General Order Number 100, which contained the no torture injunction in it, and was binding on the armed forces, and has been carried forward as military doctrine every year, up until the arrival of George Bush. So that's the first. But then we have what's called the anti-torture statute, which is a federal law that basically prohibits torturing individuals, and it applies outside of the United States. So it's binding on American actors when they leave American soil, and it governs how they can deal with other people. Violation of that statute is a felony. And we have the War Crimes Act as well. So the War Crimes Act says if you engage in a serious breach of the Geneva Conventions, here we go, but they're codified inside of a U.S. statute, that is a crime. It's a felony under U.S. law, and it can be prosecuted. And in fact, the U.S. does routinely prosecute people for violation of those statutes. We had the Chucky Taylor prosecution just a couple of years ago. That's the son of the former dictator of Liberia, prosecuted in a U.S. court. The case is called United States against Belfast.
That's Pat Robertson's friend, right?
A good friend of Pat Robertson. Prosecuted and convicted, now serving time in a prison for torturing people overseas. So it's a domestic American criminal law.
Mm-hmm. And now, the War Crimes Act and the Anti-Torture Statute, one of those was signed by Ronald Reagan. The other was passed by majority Republican House and Senate under Newt Gingrich and Trent Lott, right?
That's
so
exactly
this isn't
right.
just like Jimmy Carter and the wimpy Democrats or something like that, right?
No.
We've got to cover our right flank here, Scott.
Well, let's be clear about this. The anti-torture laws in America are completely Republican, beginning to end, every one of them. The original anti-torture acts and orders came from a Republican administration in 1863, Abraham Lincoln, and the subsequent statutes, both of them came from Ronald Reagan, and the impetus to push them forward came from Dwight Eisenhower. So, in fact, we don't have any Democratic fingerprints on any of this. It's 100% Republican beginning to end.
Mm-hmm. Well, wait, one of them was the War Crimes Act, right, was some kind of update or what in the 1990s where it was Gingrich and Lott, right?
Clinton signing the act, but I mean it was actually originally put forward by the Reagan administration.
I see. Okay.
So it didn't finally get approved and passed until 1996, but the original proposal was by, originally it came as implementation of treaty commitments of Ronald Reagan, and the legislation was drafted by the Bush administration, the original Bush administration, 41, not 43.
Mm-hmm. All right, and now let's talk a little bit about WikiLeaks, because I forgot what my awesome next question about the law was going to be there. But really at issue, I guess, a couple of things. Primarily I'm distracted. I'm looking at this Frago 242. This is the torture order there. This is so far the big headline from the WikiLeaks.
Yeah,
they've really made an issue out of WikiLeaks itself, and so I was wondering really what your take on WikiLeaks is.
That fragmentary order clearly violates the law, and the order, as General Pace described it at that press conference, he described exactly what the law requires, which was written up in field manuals and was military doctrine of the United States for more than 100 years, and he correctly described it. So this fragmentary order appears to have come from that pushback from Secretary Rumsfeld, and it is squarely contradictory to what the law requires. So it's astonishing, but I think we can well understand why they kept it secret. But let's talk about something else here, too. Remember, just before the WikiLeaks stuff broke, we got these dramatic statements put out by the Pentagon saying, first of all, there's nothing interesting here. Just move along. You already know all this stuff. And those statements issued by the Pentagon, they say down below, oh, and by the way, we haven't seen the new materials. So, how can they say that if they haven't seen them? It's completely ridiculous. And then they make the accusation again that the disclosure of these documents, parentheses, which we haven't seen, close parentheses, jeopardizes the safety of American soldiers fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. And remember, with the last set of leaks, they made exactly the same accusation repeatedly. I think we can count more than 20 times that accusation was stated by public affairs officers and senior officials at the Department of Defense. Chairman Levin from the Senate Armed Services Committee wrote a letter to Gates saying, this is a very serious accusation. Can you please tell me the factual basis for this claim? And Gates sent a letter in response saying, well, having fully reviewed it now, I can tell you that there's no basis for this claim, and it really didn't in any way jeopardize American soldiers. So there you go. I mean, they rush out aggressively with baseless statements, and then when pressed, under oath, giving testimony to a congressional committee, they acknowledge it's not true. Yeah. And I think people really need to focus on the fact, and I think, frankly, it does not serve the United States and the Department of Defense well for public affairs officers to engage in what is effectively a disinformation campaign.
Yeah,
and that's
an
exactly
obvious one, too. I mean, it is really effective in a way. The phrase that you didn't quote exactly is blood on their hands. WikiLeaks has blood on their hands, and that was what they said 20 times.
Exactly, which is complete nonsense. I mean,
and it really stuck, though, in a lot of people's minds. I've seen people saying these guys are traitors and they ought to be hung and whatever. Like Julian Assange is the war criminal here.
No, and in fact, it's exactly the other way around. In fact, I think, it's quite well established that it serves the United States to be upfront and transparent about these matters. And that's how we that's how we mark ourselves as a democratic society. We are transparent about these things. When we make mistakes, we act on them. If people are not upholding the law, we prosecute the people who are not upholding the law. That's what a democratic state does. The shift that occurred under Bush was to keep everything super secret all the time, and when the law is violated and there's serious crimes committed, we take no action following up on it. We don't prosecute anyone. We don't hold them accountable. Now, one of the really big things that emerges from these documents is detailed documentation of hundreds of incidents in which Iraqi civilians were raped, murdered, and killed by American contract security forces. And you have soldiers on the ground noting this, saying they're really worried about it, saying we should do something about it. This is undermining morale. It's just damaging our reputation very seriously. And the Pentagon, again, is telling them, oh, don't do anything. Stand by. So the Pentagon is taking this position that the security contractors just have impunity.
Right, well, and that was the game all along, was, talk to the Justice Department, talk to the Pentagon, talk to the State Department, talk to the Justice Department.
And note that the Blackwater cases, as the New York Times observed last week, have fallen apart. None of these prosecutions is being successful. Well, that's what I was predicting from the beginning. And the reason they have fallen apart is lack of will on the part of the Justice Department to act on or prosecute these cases. And one of the things we see in the WikiLeaks documents is that the Justice Department doesn't want to do anything. That's completely clear. Mm-hmm. So it's not a legal technical problem. It's a failure of will, and the real seat of that failure of will was in the Bush-era Justice Department. They were evidently too busy out engaged in political prosecutions to actually do their job.
Right. Well, and this is what we've talked about for, I guess going on 5 years now, maybe 6, Scott, is that Dick Cheney and David Addington and I guess Scooter Libby, but the vice president's office specifically, had a plan, really. Their goal was, in the name of as many things as they could, to prove that there is no law that can bind their authority, that they really can do anything. That impunity itself was the goal. And I guess as we're talking about this in 2010, it worked. I mean, that was it. You can only draw so many lines in the sand just to cross them and see if anybody pushes back or not, and then draw another one and cross it, and draw another one and cross it. Where now, I mean, the idea, come on, that Eric Holder's going to do anything about what we're learning, over this weekend and over the next couple of weeks as people go through these documents, it's just not going to happen.
Well,
we know it's not.
A major neoconservative project is that the government, when it's run or revised by neoconservatives, is above the law.
Yep. Well, there they go. And I guess, it's been like this for a while in certain ways, but now it seems like, even though they pretend to go by the authorization to use military force, really all that doctrine of the plenary power of the imperial president still stands, doesn't it?
Yep, it does.
All right. Well, good. At least somebody's paying attention and teaching us about it. I appreciate having you, Scott.
Hey, great to be with you. Good luck.
Everybody, that is the heroic anti-torture human rights lawyer, the Other Scott Horton. His blog is no comment at harpers.org, and that's the show for today, Antiwar Radio.